Hello and welcome to the Chirp Science. I'm Andrew Michaud and I am here with Doctor of Toxicology and Pharmacology and President of Keene State College. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you, Andrew. And hi, I'm Melinda Treadwell. I'm the president here at Keene State and a proud alum of this college as well. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely, thank you for taking the time. So, where did your interest in the sciences and safety start?
So, probably if I think about 8th grade. So, for any of the listeners who know my story, I grew up in Central Maine, and I had an 8th grade science teacher who had a essay competition about natural science, and I was fortunate to be one of the people she selected and was able to travel to the Department of Marine Resources for 2 weeks in the summer between my 7th grade and 8th grade year. And for someone who grew up in Central Maine, who had family members with mostly military experience or very rural Maine work experience, college wasn't something that was normal in my town or certainly in my family. And so when I went with her to the Department of Marine Resources, I worked with people studying red tide, studying lobsters, and I was a 7th grader, almost rising 8th grader. But what I realized was they were doing science. They talked about the questions they wanted to understand, the work that they were trying to do, and specifically the red tide and the shellfish poisoning that was being studied. I can distinctly remember wanting to study something that we can't see or understand or perceive that results in very serious environmental impact. So I didn't have the words for that then, but it just captivated me that there were people who answered questions through a scientific method. And particularly I appreciated the work that they were doing on the seacoast of Maine, which I just found, it was tremendously beautiful. I lived inland, and so I thought, I want to be that. I didn't know what it meant, but it connected me into then what the trajectory was for me.
Excellent. So you mentioned that unseen things affecting the environment. Is that what got you interested in chemistry and safety and all that?
It was. So when I studied at Keene State, when I was a senior in high school looking for college options, Keene State had an environmental chemistry program that wasn't offered in Maine. It was one of the regional transfer programs that we still offer now. So environmental chemistry connected a study of the environment and a study of chemicals that we couldn't see, taste, smell, but that were having an environmental impact. And so I knew that when I thought about Keene State and I compared that to the other schools I was considering, environmental chemistry was actually the thing that most captivated me. And so that's what led me here and what I started studying. I changed my major in my sophomore year. I loved the chemistry, but I wanted the application, that the safety major. It was called industrial safety at the time. And what professionals were doing out of that industrial safety program, they were going into employment where they were making assessment of work. They were taking assessment of workers' exposures to chemicals or environmental release of chemicals from production. And I was very excited about that work and went into what was known as industrial hygiene, which was my early career trajectory, measuring chemicals in the air and the water, in the soil, and trying to estimate what the risks would be for workers or for the environment. And that all started at Keene State from the environmental chemistry program.
Excellent. So how does that evolve into toxicology and pharmacology? Because there's a little connection there that's obvious, the chemistry, but how does that warp into that whole side?
Yeah, so I had really wonderful mentors. I worked at Markham, which is now Markham Image, when I was a student here, full-time in the summers and part-time during the academic year. And I was responsible for working on their occupational safety and health programming, mostly around chemical exposures. They made inks and printing processes, so it was mostly exposure to solvents, things in the air. So I loved that work, and when I finished at Keene State, I stayed on there for a few months in a full-time position, and then I went to Lockheed Martin Marietta. And what I realized early on in my career was I really enjoyed the technical aspects of measuring and comparing what people were exposed to against what were considered safe standard limits, federal limits that were established for chemical safety. But what I didn't understand was the disease process, how people got sick really from the chemical exposures they experienced. And so one evening, when I was at Lockheed, probably a year after I finished at Keene State, I was monitoring a gentleman's exposure to a solvent called methylene chloride. It causes liver cancer, we know now, but at the time it had just been classified a cancer-causing agent. And he cleaned large pieces of equipment in these big tanks. And so I was monitoring his breathing zone, and he said, I used to climb in those tanks. Am I going to get cancer? And this was a third shift. I was working late into the night with him and his coworkers, and I couldn't answer his question. I said, you really should talk to your doctor, let them know how long you've worked in this environment, and there are probably screens that they can do of your liver health, and keep an eye on whatever your physical health is as you move forward. But I knew in that moment that simply measuring and comparing against what a safe standard was, I wanted to understand what made something not safe. So I wanted to understand the toxicology, the early cellular changes, the things that result in cancer and non-cancer impacts. And so that started me down the road of graduate study and led me to Dartmouth Med School, where I studied asbestos and man-made fibers that were being used to replace asbestos, studying lung illness and lung fibrosis. So that was my work at Dartmouth, and it was mostly because I just had that interest in asking questions of why people got sick and trying to understand it. And I was a science geek, so it made it easy to kind of connect it into the next level of training. So that's really what took me there to study toxicology. And the discipline that I was in was pharmacology and toxicology, so chemicals that are used as treatments and when they go bad. And so that's really the framing of pharmacology and toxicology as a remedy or a poison. And so I was studying mostly understanding both sides of this as part of the med school curriculum, but I looked at the toxicology of lung disease, fibrosis, and cancer. So that's what led me to it.
Very interesting.
Long answer, sorry.
Oh, please. Long answers are good. So really you saw a problem and you decided that you wanted to know more and how to solve it?
Yeah, I think my interest was, occupational safety and health is a very personal experience. You're working with an individual and you're trying to make sure they go home safe to their family. They're going to have a long life, a productive career, but they won't develop illness. That's really what motivates the occupational safety and health profession. And so I think for me it was just, I had relationships with all of these people that I had responsibility to make sure they were safe. And I had questions about when that gentleman asked me, will I get liver cancer? And I realized I don't know enough about how cancer begins to actually even offer anything to him to help him not be afraid. And as a professional, for me at that moment, I wanted to understand more about early disease, because for me, I knew this was where I wanted my career to proceed, was looking at people's illness risks, preventing illness for individuals and for the environment. And it seemed like the next logical step was to try to do more to understand so I could be a better advocate. And at some level, even though, again, I didn't have the words for this then, I think it was to help be a better educator, help people understand how to take precaution for themselves about things that we don't fully understand that could be risky. So that was the early motivation.
That was a noble profession.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think of it so much in that way, but I'm grateful that whatever I can do in my profession hopefully makes a difference for someone else. And it's really important because I'm very closely connected with all of those employees, and the ability to make sure that they, hopefully no one that I had responsibility for got sick later in life because we did enough to protect them.
Absolutely.
That was always my job.
I'm sure they appreciated you for that. So you spent, if my research is correct, nearly a decade as a toxicologist for Lockheed Martin, correct?
Yeah, over the two, before grad school and after. I went back to them after grad school as one of their senior toxicologists and worked with them on air pollution and some of our environmental policy actions. So yes, that was the direct work within their corporate occupational safety and health team.
And then from there, I believe you went to the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And you were writing policy for them, if I'm not
That's
mistaken?
right, yes. I think I just, I loved what I was doing for Lockheed, but I wasn't making a difference in general public health. I was making a difference for the employees I had relationship with, as I said, and for the company. But I wanted to do more about kids at risk and environmental exposures broadly, and I really got interested in policy. I had been on some federal advisory groups when I was at Lockheed, looking at what those safe standards should be, helping advise based on the science what the safe limit should be for an occupational exposure. And I loved the work, but I got very interested in policy development. Considered environmental law for a bit. I was thinking to go back and get an environmental law degree because I was so captivated about how policy was developed, how scientists and policymakers and citizens could work together to develop a better solution to a complex problem. So that's what led me to the state to lead their air toxics bureau. I was developing the air toxic standards with the State Air Pollution Bureau here in New Hampshire. And it was a great move. I loved that work, policy.
Excellent. Oh, very interesting. So after working, making policy, what eventually brought you back to teaching?
Yeah, so the interesting thing was for any of the alums who might be tuning into the podcast, you might remember, if we have some alums from not so distant, Dr. Larry McDonald, Dr. David Buck were two of the leaders of the safety and health, the occupational safety and health program here at Keene State. They asked me, gee whiz, probably 1997, to be part of an advisory group to the safety major here at Keene. And I was working out of southern New Hampshire in Boston, and in Boston in those years. And so I was on their advisory group, and they said, would you consider coming back to Keene State to teach? And I thought, I love to teach, but I really love this policy work that I'm doing. And I said, keep in touch, I'll continue to be on the advisory group. And so then, between 97 and 2000, I would come back for advisory meetings, alumni events, and they would ask me, have you thought about it? Would you consider coming back? And the year of 1999 going into early 2000, I was still doing the federal policy, but what I realized was policymakers are very motivated by real original data, not necessarily a toxicologist like myself representing other people's work for them, bringing it together as an advocate, but an individual actually conducting the research. And so I realized coming to Keene State, there was a big commitment to create some undergraduate research efforts in the early 2000s here. It's what's led to our research and undergraduate research focus in our sciences. But it was new in 2000, and they hadn't really developed as a college that infrastructure. So I thought, this would be really fun. I'm coming back to a place I love. I'm working in the education profession for occupational safety and health professionals, and I'm going to be able to do research. I had 3 federal grants at the time, research with students at Keene and be directly advocating our basic research findings. And so what I loved early on at Keene was teaching in the program and having the privilege to work with undergraduate research assistants who joined me in the field and then joined me to provide testimony either at the State House or down in Boston. We provided some testimony about construction, demolition, incineration here in the state of New Hampshire. We provided information about biofuels and air pollution, and we did a lot of research on particulate in and around. We were at the World Trade Center here coming up on September 11th. We went 1 year after the towers fell to monitor the equipment exposures and the particulate that was in the air at the World Trade Center site. And I had 63 students who worked with me over the course of the first years here. And it was the most rewarding work I've probably ever done, was learning with students side by side out in the field at 4 a.m, calibrating pumps at the World Trade Center. And that's probably why I just love and continue to want to be a part of this college, is that experience just set in me a sense that anything's possible, and our students do incredible things, so it's pretty neat.
So what is rewarding about staying up at 4 a.m, manning a pump in the cold of New York City?
Yeah, I think what was interesting, there were, so Chris Langill, Josh Schroeder, and Chris Rowell were the 3 main students, and then Kate Nightingale joined me as well. That was the core team that was with me on site at the World Trade Center. We had a colleague from UMass, Lowell, who was also working with us. So getting up at 4 a.m, getting the pump set, number one, it was phenomenal to wake up Keene State students at 4 a.m. to say, okay, time to calibrate the pumps. But they were so excited because during the course of the day, they weren't excited to be up at 4. We'd get the pumps calibrated, we'd load ourselves into the van and drive to the site from the hotel. But what was exciting was those students helped to create a map of the risks and the protections afforded those construction workers at that site. We together experienced, what's really neat about science is you are in the midst of discovery at every moment, right? So you're seeing things that you're asking questions, you're making connections, you're hypothesizing about what the outcome might be, and you're in the middle of discovery at all times. And so I think for me, being a science geek, what was exciting is we were constantly in new information territory. We discovered tremendous differences between biodiesel fuel combustion and petroleum diesel fuel combustion. We monitored metals that were in those sites that weren't seen anywhere else. We had 6 sites across the Northeast. And the students helped me to put together an understanding of what those risks might be for those construction workers long term. They had been on the site since the towers fell, and some of the compounds we were seeing clearly were going to result in serious adverse health effects. And we testified before policymakers and before the union leadership for the construction trades industry, and shared our data with them. So what was exciting was that 4 a.m. time together brought us close as colleagues and friends. And what we did as a result of that work probably made some small difference in the ways that the unions tried to advocate for their protection and the way that the states and local authorities developed protection standards as a result of what those students, those 4 students really did at that site and at the other sites we studied. So I think it's the discovery, I think it's the close companionship, and the fact that it's 4 a.m. and who on earth is doing this crazy stuff that we're doing, and
That's right.
just that sense of companionship, I think, was really fun.
Oh, excellent. So while working at Keene State, before you were the president,
Yeah.
it seems that you haven't forgotten the importance of sound policymaking. I read a chapter you wrote in a safety ethics book back in, I think it was 2004. And in it, you discuss the importance of making informed decisions. So as a scientist, how do you go about making sure that a safety decision is ethical, and what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so it's interesting, that book feels like 150 years ago, right? I wrote it with some colleagues, a colleague from the healthcare industry, and I wrote on behalf of some of the policy dilemmas of occupational safety and health as I was seeing it. And I was 5 years into my role as a faculty member here, and I had been through some of that research that I just described. And then the third author in that, Manoj Patenkar, was from St. Louis, and he was working with the airline industry and the maintenance personnel who work on aircraft and the ethical decisions they need to make. So to give you an example of what that text was about, an airline mechanic can ground an airline, right, if there's something wrong, but the decision of whether it's a maintenance issue that's severe enough to ground the airline, I mean, there's tremendous money, schedule disruption, angry customers, so the pressure of those moments where there's something wrong, but is it wrong enough to delay the aircraft? Is it severe enough that the aircraft may be compromised, the safety and health of those, the flying public and the crew? Those dilemmas were then compared against what I tried to talk about, which was when you can't see or perceive something, but in the long term it could result in illness, there's an unknown risk factor. How do you, as a safety professional, make a decision when you don't have perfect information? When you know, it's like COVID, you don't have perfect information, you know some, and the science is emerging. So
When
how
do you ever have perfect information?
Exactly, and how do you practice enough protection, but not to compromise the public health and the mental health of a society that's feeling separated? And so going back and looking at that chapter, it's the moral dilemma of, can you look yourself in the mirror every morning saying, I've made this decision, and am I living up to my responsibility to those people, as I said early in my career, and have I made the best decision with the best information I have, and am I practicing moral decision making in the sense that I've not allowed an individual to experience an unknown risk that may compromise their health for the rest of their life? So it's It's a discipline within safety, occupational safety and health, that focuses on the science, the technical understanding of the data, and the moral obligation as the professional who has to educate and help protect that employee and make sure the business still operates. So it's a constant juggling, and it's probably what I found most both challenging and rewarding in the educational work I did, which is to try to help prepare individuals to stand strong with what they know and declare what they believe is the best decision to protect the most people and keep the business still operating. If you're a safety and health professional for a major multi-million-dollar corporation, how do you not bring it to its knees? Complicated and really rewarding.
Excellent. So how does that kind of thinking help inform your role as president?
So I think there are some clear parallels to science that inform my thinking. I'm very data-driven, right? So I think part of what is both, it's my security blanket. I look for the data, right? So what is the data telling me? And in all that we're looking at, there are data elements to inform. There's also stories, narrative, personal experiences that matter. So when we're making decisions about anything to do with the college, I'm constantly trying to focus on the fact that this college is a critically important role to play, and that is to help provide access to an education for people so that the rest of their life can be open to them. That happened for me when I came here. That's my primary obligation, and so how I make those decisions as president, I try to listen very carefully, gather as much information as I can, the qualitative data, people's stories and their requests and their needs. And with the team and the colleagues I have the privilege to work with and our students, we look at information to help make those decisions. And I think our COVID planning was probably the most recent, easy example to try to articulate. As president, I had a responsibility to make sure no one did everything in my power to keep people from getting sick. We didn't know everything about COVID last year, but we put together some of the best thinkers in the university system and in the state. And with our students, we developed a plan for Keene State, and I had the privilege of leading the planning for the system, where we brought in good data, we talked about what we didn't know, and if you don't know, you use the data and you add some safety factors. You try to layer the protections so that you don't result in someone being missed and an unknown risk being ignored. So I use the data. I think my scientific background taught me to try to observe the environment that I'm in and listen, as well as watch. And I think those serve me well. Sometimes what the challenge with scientists in administration is that we can become frozen looking for the complete data set to make the decision. So I think the good fortune I had in safety and health is you didn't always have all the information you needed. As you said earlier, there's never complete data. So how do you make it the best decision you can and then be comfortable enough to go back and adjust it? And we did a lot of that last year because we made the best decisions we could and we watched very carefully, and if something changed, we adapted. And our students were a part of that and advised where we went, and we're leaning in on all levels. And I guess that's the clearest example of where I applied scientific method and thinking to something that was my presidential obligation, which is keeping people safe.
Excellent. So now that we do have not the whole data set, but more data, how do you feel about the college's initial reactions to COVID? How do you feel about those early plans?
Yeah, it took a tremendous team. So there were dozens and dozens and dozens of people across the system working on the plans. We had layers of protection. We made changes to the physical plant, the ventilation systems. We developed requirements for personal protection. We did education campaigns. We had peer educators within our students. I'm incredibly proud of that work because as I've looked at the fact that we know 96 to 98% of our entire population tested every week last year, sometimes twice a week, we have more data about where the COVID movement happened. How was it transferred? Did it transfer? Did we see it transfer in the classroom? All of that data, the wastewater sampling that we did, helped us to help the city and help the hospital respond. It helped the state response. And I think we were, frankly, a college that showed the way because our students we're so concerned about keeping one another safe and keeping the staff and faculty safe and keeping the city safe. And I heard this every time I talked to a student. Our students led the way. And I think the work of the students at Keene State showed that a college could operate without interruption during the most uncertain time for a pandemic in the history that we'll know in our lifetime. And I'm really proud of that. And I think not because I had any hand in doing it, but because we all did it together. Not that I led it, that I had a hand in it with a team. And I really believe it made a difference. And I know we didn't bring risk to the city, and we didn't bring risk to one another. And I think there was no certainty that that could happen last year. And this year, as we go into it, we're trying to make sure that we attend to mental health, to a sense of isolation, that there are those things that also the data would tell us pure safety would be don't be connected with each other, but there are ways for us to be connected with one another that provide a level of safety, and the risk is small. And so I think our adaptations for this year, more in-person classes, spacing but not at 6 feet, now at 3 feet, that's all scientifically informed, and I still think we'll be a leader. It's going to be touch and go as we move through Delta, but I'm very proud of what the college showed, and I'm mostly proud, and I brag about this everywhere I go, because every person questioned whether college students would put people at risk because they wouldn't adhere. And I never saw a moment last year where students weren't thinking about other people. And I think that's endemic to our community, is that we all think about others. And so is it a pain to wear a mask? Is it kind of annoying to be separated? Is it frustrating to not have full social connection? Yes. But we did it willingly because we knew it made a difference for the people with us. And that I'm really proud of about this college, and tremendously proud of the students because they did it and they're doing it again this year.
Excellent. My bias aside, Keene State definitely is a special place.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And I know we love it because we're here, but I travel and I talk to a lot of presidents and visit a lot of colleges, and there is a special sense of connection to one another and to service at this college that is different. And I think that's made a difference for us as we grapple with COVID and try to get back to normal.
Yes. Enter to learn, go forth to serve,
That's
right?
That's right. And we show that, and that means a lot.
Excellent. So bouncing back to some more of your time at Keene State, back when you were still a student, I found an article published about your inauguration in which you mentioned that you wanted to expose yourself to things that would make you a better person. And you said this in reference to the arts and music classes that you took here at Keene State. What exactly did you mean by that?
So I took courses in Romantic and Victorian literature and music production and music listening, and I think it's part of we talked about the specialness of this place. I know that our programs prepare our students for work and for life because we're critical thinkers. We know how to communicate. That's the liberal arts core. But what's also, I think, really special about the liberal arts foundation of this campus is if I had gone to some of the other institutions that have safety majors, I would have done a lot more engineering coursework, right, and mathematics coursework. I had very adequate exposure to engineering and mathematics to be successful in my profession as a hygienist. But what I got at Keene State was an appreciation of literature, an appreciation of the writing process, and how really talented authors can tell a story that change your life and draw you in, and you are forever changed by just reading a paragraph by a gifted author. And I think Janet Grayson, who was a faculty member, and I've had the good fortune to tell her this personally, but I meant it, her class, she would enter and we would dissect Romantic and Victorian literature through the author's eyes, and she just opened the world for me. As a young kid from Central Maine that never had been exposed to that type of heady literature, she changed my life because I still read Shakespeare as a result of what I was captivated. I still read Dickens, and those things were open to me because of Keene State. And in music, I still remember that I had never been exposed to the Baroque period music, and I've discovered that that is one of the things that I love to experience and seek, and opera. and these other forms of performance expression that at another school I may not have experienced, but at Keene State, it changed who I am, and it made me appreciate the world through, I think, a different approach to the humanities, the fine, and the performing arts. When I lived in Boston, I regularly went to the Museum of Fine Arts, not because I'm an artist, but because I love the beauty and the peace of being in that space of beautiful art. And that appreciation and that rounding of who I was as a scientist and as a effort to be a high integrity professional making a difference. I think I'm a better person because I like to expose myself to those things and expose my kids and others to those things, because it's what the world is made of, is the beauty around us. And without experiencing those things, I wouldn't be the same person I am today. And so it's those faculty and those courses. I play the trumpet really badly. It sounds like fighting cats. I tried to play in the Monadnock New Horizons band a few years ago. I love it. I love to read music, but I'm not a gifted musician by any stretch of the imagination. But I love to witness what our students do, what our faculty do, and music changes your world if you can really just experience it and be open to all the different forms and styles of music. And so Keene State opened that. And that's what I was trying to say, is that I am a better person because I've opened my world to things that weren't part of my track, right? If I'd been narrowly prepared. And that's what I love about this college, is it's the breadth and the openness of it.
Are there any better person pieces you'd recommend to anyone listening?
The things that opened me up the most.
Yeah.
Recent readings that I would offer, there's a text called Braiding Sweetgrass that is just an incredible book. It was written by, so it's a scientist and a First Nations person who wrote about the natural sciences and the connection with indigenous science and indigenous practice. And it's an incredible book, and I would strongly recommend it. It just helps us see the world through the lens of this moment with the wisdom of the first people, combined with our efforts to explain things like climate change through science. So that's a piece for me recently that opened my world a little bit, in addition to reading a book about Nelson Mandela and his leadership styles, which I've really appreciated as well. And then I guess the other thing that I have really appreciated recently, and if anyone can do it, go see the jazz ensemble here at Keene State. If anyone hasn't, if any of our students, listeners, alums, community members, the jazz ensemble, all of our music performances are incredible, but the students pull you out of your seat when you go to see the jazz ensemble perform, and it is incredible. And it's always right around December where they have their big annual performance, and it is remarkable.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's coming up sooner than I think we'd all care to admit.
But check it out for sure. It's super fun, and just the talent of those musicians is incredible.
Excellent. All right, so as we're coming to a close, before my last question, is there anything you'd like to add?
You know, I think the biggest thing is I am incredibly privileged to be in the role that I'm in. I never thought I'd be the president at Keene State, and every day I hope that I'm making a difference for the students, a positive difference, that we're learning and growing together. And I'm just really thrilled to be here. So I'm thrilled to tell you part of my story, and
Absolutely.
And thanks for the opportunity to do it.
Absolutely. Imagine telling freshman Melinda way back when you're going to be in charge of this place one day.
That even when I was faculty Melinda and Dean Melinda and interim provost Melinda, I would have said, no, it's not my trajectory. But be careful where life takes you and where duty calls. So it has been the biggest privilege of my life to be back here and hopefully making a difference to help this college through this moment in our history.
Excellent. All right. Well, last question. Do you have any advice for students interested in the fields of safety, pharmaceuticals, or toxicology?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is, so again, being a young kid out of Central Maine with no models of what it means to go to college, who on earth would believe that I should go to Dartmouth Med School and that I should be a part of federal policy development? I had advisors here, David Buck, who sat with me one day and said, you can do anything. And there are some things that you can't do, right? And so you'll find your way to that. There will never be perfection in all things. But if you don't try, you'll never know. So what I would say to anyone who's interested in occupational safety and health, chemistry, environmental science, don't say no because you don't know what the outcome would be on the other side. What is the job on the other side of this? Because I'll say in safety and health, I've had 5 careers that are connected with the discipline just in occupational safety and health and public health. 5 very different career tracks early. And the skill sets that I honed at this college prepared me to be an administrator as well, to be someone who could lead and communicate or do my best to do those things well. So believe in yourself and believe enough in your interests and your questions and your passions to follow them. And ask for help. If you don't know and you're stuck, reach out and ask for help. But it's a rewarding life if you want to make a difference. Occupational safety and health, environmental health. I feel that I learned and grew, and I hope I made an impact, a positive impact for people's lives. So it's tremendously rewarding. It is noble at some level to do the type of work where hopefully you're making a difference in people's lives, their families' connection for the long term. And don't give up on yourself. If you think you're interested, go for it and try it. Because Dartmouth wasn't easy, but I had really good mentors. And when I got a low pass in a class, which was my first semester at Dartmouth, I thought, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. And a student tutor sat down with me, and I ended up doing very well and then gaining just enough confidence that I could be one of the graduates at the top of the class by the time I finished. That was because someone put a hand out and said, help me and let me help you kind of understand what this is. And there was nothing magic beyond just hard work and believing enough and asking for help where I needed it.
Excellent.
So thank you. And thank you, Andrew, for the chance to be here with you tonight. And thanks for the podcast that you're
problem.
doing. I look forward to listening to all of them.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I look forward to letting you see all of them.
Awesome.
All right. Well,
I'm glad you're not in your basement.
I am glad I'm not in the basement anymore, too. I'm glad they finally let me out.
Thank you.
All right. Absolutely. Thank you for listening to The Chirp. Music provided by composer Nathaniel Bridges. See you next time.